My name is Darian, 27 years old, and after 3 years of saving every penny from my software engineering job, I finally bought my dream car, an Audi A4. Then my younger sister Amber borrowed it for what she claimed was a job interview. 6 hours later, I was staring at my crumpled hood while she smirked and said, "Don't worry, Mom and Dad will make you forgive me anyway." Before I dive into this family betrayal story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more real-life drama that'll make your family look normal. Growing up in suburban Chicago, our family seemed picture-perfect from the outside. Dad worked as an account manager at a manufacturing company. Mom taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school, and we lived in a comfortable 4-bedroom house with a big backyard. But underneath that normal exterior was a family dynamic that always left me feeling like I was playing second fiddle to my sister Amber. From the earliest memories of my childhood, I noticed how differently my parents treated us. Amber was 4 years younger than me, and somehow that translated into her getting away with almost anything. When I was 10 and she was 6, she destroyed my science fair project the night before it was due. Instead of disciplining her, my parents made me stay up late rebuilding it while telling me, "She's just a little girl. You need to be more careful with where you put your things." This pattern repeated throughout our childhood. When we were teenagers, Amber borrowed my new bike without permission and left it unlocked at the mall where it got stolen. My parents made me share my savings to buy a new bike that we would both use. Then there was the time she threw a party in our house when our parents were away for a weekend, causing over $1,000 in damage. Somehow that resulted in both of us being grounded even though I was away at a friend's house and had nothing to do with it. I learned early on that the path of least resistance was to keep my head down, work hard, and plan for independence. While Amber was the social butterfly with an endless stream of friends and activities that my parents enthusiastically funded, I focused on academics and after-school jobs. By 16, I was working 20 hours a week at the local grocery store while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. My parents were proud, sure, but it was always a different kind of pride than what they showed for Amber. My achievements were expected. Hers were celebrated. College was my escape. I earned a scholarship that covered about half of my tuition at the University of Illinois, where I studied computer science. The remaining costs I covered through student loans and working part-time jobs. Meanwhile, my parents paid Amber's full tuition at a private university where she changed majors 3 times before settling on communications. After graduation, I landed a job at a tech company in Chicago. The starting salary was decent, but between student loan payments and the exorbitant rent for my 1-bedroom apartment, I wasn't exactly living large. Still, I was determined to stand on my own 2 feet. I created a strict budget and stuck to it religiously. I packed lunches instead of buying them, limited my social outings, and put aside 30% of each paycheck into savings. For 3 years, I watched that savings account grow. While my friends upgraded their apartments or took exotic vacations, I kept my eyes on a different prize, an Audi A4 slate gray with black leather interior. It wasn't just transportation to me. It was a symbol of everything I had worked for, a tangible representation of my independence and perseverance. The day I finally had enough saved was one of the proudest moments of my life. I researched dealerships, thoroughly negotiated the price down, and paid in full without financing. The feeling of driving that car off the lot, knowing it was completely mine, bought with my own hard-earned money, was indescribable. When I drove it to my parents' house for our regular Sunday dinner, Dad came outside immediately to inspect it. He whistled appreciatively and asked about the specs, but then couldn't resist adding, "You know, you could have gotten a lot more car for your money if you'd gone with something practical like a Honda." Mom was more supportive, congratulating me and saying it was beautiful, though. She added, "I just hope you're still putting money away for a house down payment." Amber's reaction was the most surprising. She circled the car, slowly running her hand along the hood. Wow, Big Brother finally splurged on something nice. I never thought I'd see the day. There was something in her tone I couldn't quite identify at the time, but in retrospect it was envy. My relationship with Amber had always been complicated. By our 20s, the 4-year age gap meant less in terms of maturity, but our fundamental differences remained. While I had embraced responsibility and independence, Amber seemed perpetually stuck in a cycle of drama and dependence. She lived in an apartment that our parents subsidized, worked at a marketing firm where she frequently complained about being underappreciated, and had a revolving door of friends and romantic partners who always seemed to be taking advantage of her generosity, according to her stories. Despite our differences, I tried to maintain a cordial relationship. We weren't close confidantes, but we got along well enough at family gatherings and occasionally texted about mundane things. I had long ago accepted that we would never have the kind of sibling bond you see in movies, but I had made peace with that, or so I thought. It was a typical Sunday dinner at my parents' house just 3 weeks after I had purchased my car. Mom had made her famous pot roast. Dad was talking about a new client at work, and Amber was uncharacteristically quiet. Usually, she dominated the conversation with stories about her social life or complaints about her job, but that evening she seemed distracted, checking her phone frequently and contributing only minimal responses to the conversation. As we were finishing dessert, Mom turned to me. "How's the new car treating you, Darian? Still enjoying it?" Before I could answer, Amber perked up. "It's absolutely gorgeous. I love the way it handles the curves on Lakeshore Drive." "You drove it?" Mom asked, looking between us. "No," I clarified quickly. "I took her for a ride last weekend. I hadn't actually wanted to, but Amber had shown up at my apartment, unannounced, insisting that she needed to see what all the fuss was about." "It's incredible," Amber gushed. "So smooth and powerful. Nothing like my old clunker." She drove a 10-year-old Toyota Corolla that had seen better days, but was perfectly functional. Dad chuckled. "Well, for what Darian paid, it should drive like a dream." There was a moment of silence as we all sipped our coffee, and then Amber set down her cup with purpose. "Actually," she said, her voice taking on a tone I recognized from childhood, the one she used when she was about to ask for something significant. "I was wondering if I could borrow your car tomorrow, Darian." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Borrow my car? Why?" "I have this really important interview at Lewis Media Group. It's for a senior marketing position that would be a huge step up from my current job. The office is in Highland Park, and I'm worried my car might not make it all the way there and back reliably. Plus, showing up in an Audi would make a much better impression than my rusty Corolla." I hesitated, my instinct immediately screaming, "No. I don't know, Amber. I haven't even had it a month yet." "It's just for a few hours," she pressed. "The interview is at 1 and I'd have it back by 4 at the latest. I'd be super careful with it, I promise." "Why don't you just take an Uber or something?" I suggested. She shook her head. "To Highland Park and back, that would cost a fortune. Plus, what kind of impression would that make showing up in a rideshare?" I could feel the familiar pressure building as both my parents watched this exchange. Dad cleared his throat. "It is a pretty important interview," he said. "Lewis Media Group is a prestigious firm." Mom nodded. "And Highland Park is quite a drive in an older car. Remember when your car broke down on the expressway last year, Amber? That was so dangerous." I looked between them, feeling the subtle but unmistakable expectation that I should help my sister. It was a familiar sensation, one that had guided many of my childhood decisions. "I don't know," I said again, trying to articulate my concerns without sounding selfish. "Insurance gets complicated when someone else drives your car, and it's still so new to me." "I understand," Amber said, her voice dropping with disappointment. "It was just a thought. I guess I'll risk taking my car and pray it doesn't break down during rush hour on the expressway, or spend half my paycheck on an Uber." Mom gave me a look that silently communicated her disapproval of my hesitation. Dad was more direct. "Darian, it's just a car. Family helps family." I felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. Logically, I knew I had every right to say no. The car was mine, paid for with my money, and entrusting it to someone else, even family, came with risks. But decades of family dynamics were hard to break free from. I found myself mentally calculating the risks. Highland Park was about 25 miles from where Amber lived, mostly highway driving. If she really did just go to the interview and come straight back, that would be 50 miles total, not that much in the grand scheme of things. "If I do let you borrow it," I said slowly, "there would have to be some ground rules." Amber's face lit up, sensing victory. "Of course, absolutely." You take it directly to the interview and back. No side trips, no extra stops. She nodded eagerly. No passengers. Just you in the car. Definitely solo trip all the way. And you have to have it back by 4, no exceptions. I have plans tomorrow evening. Totally understood. 1 to 4 direct there, and back, no one else in the car. I swear. I still felt uneasy, but with my parents watching expectantly, I found myself reluctantly agreeing, and you have to fill it up with premium gas before you return it. Deal. She was practically bouncing in her seat now. Mom beamed at us. See, that's what siblings are for. Dad nodded approvingly. You're doing the right thing, Darian. It's good to help your sister with her career advancement. The next morning, Amber came to my apartment to pick up the car. I spent 15 minutes going over everything with her, from how to adjust the seats to the sensitivity of the accelerator. I reminded her again of our agreement. I know, she said, barely containing her impatience. To the interview and back, no passengers return by 4 with a full tank. You've told me like 20 times. I handed over the keys with a sense of foreboding that I tried to dismiss as irrational. This was my sister, after all. Despite our differences, surely she understood how important this car was to me. Good luck with the interview, I said as she slid into the driver's seat. She grinned up at me suddenly, looking much younger than her 23 years. Thanks, big brother. You're the best. As I watched my Audi disappear down the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that I might regret this decision. I pushed the thought away. Even Amber wouldn't be irresponsible with something this important to me, right? I was in a meeting with my development team when my phone started vibrating repeatedly in my pocket. After the third call in rapid succession, I excused myself to check what was happening. 4 missed calls from Amber. As I stood in the hallway debating whether to call back or wait until after the meeting, a text message appeared. Call me now. Emergency. My stomach dropped as I dialed her number. She answered on the first ring, her voice high-pitched and frantic. Darian. Oh my God, Darian. What's wrong, I asked, though some part of me already knew. There's been an accident, she sobbed. Your car. I'm so sorry, but there was nothing I could do. The world seemed to tilt around me. Are you hurt? Despite everything, that was still my first concern. No, I'm fine. Just shaken up. But your car, it's pretty bad. Where are you? I managed to ask, already walking toward the elevator. She gave me an intersection in Evanston, nowhere near Highland Park, where her interview was supposed to be. I didn't comment on this discrepancy, focused only on getting there as quickly as possible. Stay there. I'm on my way, I said, ending the call. I sent a quick message to my team lead explaining that I had a family emergency and needed to leave, then ordered a rideshare. The 20-minute drive felt like hours, my mind racing with questions and fears. How bad was the damage? What happened? Why was she in Evanston instead of Highland Park? When the car pulled up to the intersection, I saw it immediately. My beautiful Audi, its front end crumpled against a light pole. The hood was accordioned back toward the windshield, the driver's side headlight completely shattered. 2 police cars were parked nearby, lights flashing, and an officer was speaking with Amber, who was gesturing animatedly. I approached slowly, still processing the sight of my dream car now a wreck. Amber saw me, and her expression changed, her animated gestures ceasing immediately. Darian, she called out, a nervous edge to her voice. I'm so glad you're here. As I got closer, I noticed 3 other people standing off to the side, 2 young women and a young man, all looking approximately Amber's age. A sinking feeling grew in my stomach. What happened? I asked, looking between Amber and the police officer. The officer, a middle-aged man with a weary expression, consulted his notepad. According to witnesses and the preliminary investigation, the vehicle was traveling above the speed limit when the driver attempted to make a turn, lost control, and collided with the pole. I nodded numbly, then turned to Amber. I thought your interview was in Highland Park. She had the grace to look embarrassed. It got rescheduled. Then Tiffany called about meeting for lunch in Evanston since I had the afternoon free. And who are they? I asked, nodding toward the 3 bystanders. Amber shifted uncomfortably. My friends. They were meeting us at the restaurant. In my car. The car you promised would only have you in it. The police officer cleared his throat. Sir, were you aware that your sister was driving your vehicle? Yes, I admitted. I lent it to her for the day. There was no point in denying that part. He nodded. We've completed the accident report. No other vehicles were involved, and there were no injuries. Your sister has been issued a citation for careless driving. The vehicle will need to be towed. As if on cue, a tow truck pulled up to the scene. The driver hopped out and approached us, clipboard in hand. This the vehicle, he asked, pointing to my Audi. I nodded wordlessly. Where do you want it taken? I gave him the address of a repair shop near my apartment that specialized in luxury vehicles, then signed the necessary paperwork. As the tow truck operator began preparing my car for transport, I called my insurance company to report the accident and start the claims process. Throughout all of this, Amber stood to the side with her friends, occasionally whispering to them. Once the police officer left and the tow truck began pulling away with my crumpled car, she approached me cautiously. So, what happens now? She asked. Now I have to figure out how much this is going to cost and deal with the insurance, I said flatly. I'm really sorry, Darian. It was an accident. The road was slippery, and the car is more powerful than I'm used to. I looked at her incredulously. The road is dry, Amber, and you promised me you'd go straight to the interview and back alone. Plans changed, she said defensively. The interview got rescheduled, and I didn't think it would be a big deal to meet some friends for lunch. Not a big deal, I repeated, my voice rising despite my attempt to stay calm. Look at what happened to my car. Her friends, sensing the tension, mumbled excuses and began walking away. Amber called after them, Wait, how am I supposed to get home? One of them turned back and shrugged. Maybe call an Uber. Sorry, we've got class in 20 minutes. Amber turned back to me, her expression shifting from defensive to pleading. Can you give me a ride home? The audacity of the request almost made me laugh. I don't have a car anymore, remember? We'll both have to get a ride share. The ride back to the city was tense and mostly silent. I stared out the window, trying to process what had happened and calculate the potential financial impact. My insurance had a $1,000 deductible, and I wasn't sure how the claim would affect my premium going forward. Plus, there was the citation for careless driving to consider. Halfway through the ride, Amber broke the silence. It's not that bad, really. That's why people have insurance, right? They'll fix it, and everything will be fine. I didn't respond, not trusting myself to speak calmly. She tried again. Look, I know you're mad, but accidents happen. It's not like I crashed it on purpose. When I still didn't engage, her tone shifted subtly. Anyway, Mom and Dad will smooth this over. They always do. I turned to look at her, then struck by the casual confidence in her voice. There was the faintest hint of a smirk playing at the corner of her mouth, a look I'd seen countless times throughout our childhood, when she knew she would face no real consequences for her actions. This isn't a broken toy or a missed curfew, Amber, I said quietly. This is my car that I worked years to afford. She shrugged. Family forgives family. That's what Mom and Dad always say. As we pulled up to her apartment building, she gathered her purse and opened the car door. They'll call you tonight, I'm sure. Just try not to be too dramatic about it, okay? It's just a car. With that parting comment, she closed the door and walked away, leaving me with the rideshare fare and a growing sense that this situation was about to get much more complicated. My phone rang at 7:30 that evening. I had spent the afternoon on the phone with the insurance company, the repair shop, and my auto loan provider trying to sort out the mess Amber had created. I was mentally exhausted and in no mood for a lecture which I was certain was coming when I saw my parents' number on the screen. Hello, I answered, keeping my tone neutral. Darian, we need to talk about what happened today, my father said without preamble. Can you come over? I sighed. Dad, I've been dealing with insurance and repairs all afternoon. I'm tired. This is a family matter, he insisted. We should discuss it in person. Your sister is already here. Of course she was. I briefly considered refusing, but I knew that would only delay the inevitable. Fine. I'll be there in 30 minutes. When I arrived at my parents' house, the scene was exactly as I had anticipated. Mom, Dad, and Amber were seated in the living room, an impromptu family tribunal ready to pass judgment. Amber's eyes were red and puffy, clearly having been crying recently, though she looked remarkably composed now. Mom immediately stood and came to hug me. "Oh, Darian, what a terrible day it's been. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said stiffly. "My car isn't." Dad gestured to the empty armchair. "Sit down, son. We need to talk this through as a family." I took the offered seat, noticing how Amber was positioned between my parents on the sofa, physically and symbolically under their protection. "Amber has told us what happened," Mom began. "It sounds like a frightening accident. We're just thankful no one was hurt." I nodded. "Yes, that's the one silver lining." Dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Now about the car. Amber admits she made a mistake by having friends in the vehicle when she promised she wouldn't, and obviously the accident itself is unfortunate." "Unfortunate," I repeated. "Dad, she totaled my car." "It's not totaled," Amber interjected quickly. "The repair shop said it can be fixed. For almost $15,000, I countered, which is nearly half what the car is worth." Mom made a placating gesture. "The important thing is that insurance will cover most of it, right?" This was the moment I had been dreading. "Actually, there's a problem with that. My policy has restrictions on other drivers. Since Amber isn't listed on my policy and lives at a different address, the insurance company is questioning the coverage. Best case scenario, I pay my $1,000 deductible. Worst case, they deny the claim entirely." There was a moment of stunned silence as this information sank in. "But that's not fair," Mom protested. "You gave her permission to drive it. Permission that she immediately violated by taking it somewhere other than where she said she was going, and having passengers in the car," I pointed out. Dad's expression hardened slightly. "These things happen, Darian. I'm sure when you were her age you made mistakes too." "Not like this," I said firmly. "And if I had, I would have taken responsibility for them." Amber, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. "I said I was sorry. What more do you want from me?" I looked at her directly. "I want you to take responsibility. That means paying for the damages that insurance won't cover and dealing with the consequences of your actions." Mom gasped softly. "Darian, you know your sister can't afford that. She's just starting out in her career." "So am I reminded her. "But I worked hard, saved my money, and bought that car myself. Now I'm supposed to absorb this financial hit because Amber was irresponsible." Dad's voice took on the authoritative tone he had used throughout our childhood when laying down the law. "What we're saying is that this kind of resentment and bean counting has no place in a family. Accidents happen. Mistakes are made. We forgive each other and move on." I felt a familiar frustration rising within me, the same feeling I'd experienced countless times growing up when Amber was exempted from consequences that I would have faced. "This isn't about forgiveness," I tried to explain. "It's about accountability." Amber, sensing the conversation turning against her, began to tear up again. "I feel terrible about what happened. I never meant to crash the car. I was just trying to make it to lunch on time, and the car responded differently than I expected. I'm so sorry." Mom immediately put an arm around her. "Of course you are, sweetheart. We know you would never do something like this intentionally." Dad nodded in agreement, then turned back to me. "Look, Darian, your sister made a mistake. A big one, yes, but still just a mistake. The car can be repaired. Insurance will cover most of it. Let's not let this create a rift in the family." I sat there feeling increasingly frustrated by how predictably this conversation was going. Despite being the wronged party, I was somehow being cast as unreasonable for expecting accountability. "So what's the solution here?" I asked. "I just deal with the insurance hassle, pay the deductible potentially face, increased premiums for years, and Amber just says sorry, and that's it." Mom looked uncomfortable. "Well, when you put it like that, that is what you're suggesting," I pointed out. Dad sighed heavily. "Darian, it's just a car. It's a material possession. Family relationships are more important than things." "It's not just a car to me," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. "It represents 3 years of sacrifices and hard work. And this isn't just about the car anymore. It's about Amber breaking her promises, being reckless with something important to me, and now expecting to face no consequences. Amber, who had been quietly sniffling beside Mom, suddenly straightened up. The tears seemed to vanish as she looked at me with a mixture of defiance and confidence. "Come on, Darian. We all know how this ends. Mom and Dad will talk to you, you'll calm down and realize family is more important than a stupid car, and you'll forgive me. That's how it always works." The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. The smirk that accompanied this statement was subtle but unmistakable, a confident assurance that the established family dynamic would once again shield her from any meaningful consequences. I stood up, a strange calm replacing my earlier frustration. "Not this time." Mom looked alarmed. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm not going to just let this go because it's easier for everyone. Not anymore." Dad stood as well, his expression stern. "You're being unreasonable, Darian. We're asking you to be the bigger person here." "I've been the bigger person my entire life," I replied. "And where has that gotten me? Constantly taken advantage of and expected to clean up Amber's messes." Amber rolled her eyes dramatically. "God, you're so materialistic. It's just a car." "If it's just a car, then you won't mind paying for the damages," I shot back. Mom stepped between us, literally and figuratively. "Please, let's not fight. We're family. We can work this out." Dad put his hand on my shoulder, his tone softening to the one he used when trying to reason with me as a child. "Son, I understand you're upset, but holding on to anger like this isn't healthy. You need to forgive your sister and move past this. That's what families do." I gently removed his hand from my shoulder. "I'm leaving now, but this isn't over. For once, Amber is going to face the consequences of her actions." As I walked to the door, Amber called after me, her voice dripping with the entitled confidence that had defined our relationship for years. "They'll talk you around, Darian. They always do. By next week, you'll be apologizing to me for making such a big deal out of this." I turned back one last time. Don't count on it. The drive home in my rideshare was a blur of emotions. Part of me felt guilty for standing up to my family, decades of conditioning, making me question if I was indeed being unreasonable. But a stronger part felt a strange sense of liberation. For the first time, I was refusing to play my assigned role in the family drama. As I entered my apartment and saw the empty parking space where my Audi should have been, I made a decision. This time would be different. This time, I would stand my ground. I barely slept that night, replaying the family confrontation in my mind and considering my options. By morning, I had reached a resolution. I would handle this situation properly, following all official channels regardless of family pressure. If my sister and parents wanted to dismiss this as just a car, then they could explain that to the insurance company and the police. My first call was to my insurance agent, a practical woman named Karen, who had helped me select the right coverage when I purchased the car. "Based on what you've told me," she explained after I recounted the full story, "there are several problems here. First, you allowed someone not listed on your policy to drive the vehicle. Second, that person was cited for careless driving. And third, the terms of your policy specifically exclude regular coverage for drivers outside your household." "So what does that mean exactly?" I asked. "Best case scenario, your claim is approved, but your premium will increase significantly at renewal. Worst case, they could deny the claim entirely, based on the policy exclusion and the circumstances of the accident." "What circumstances specifically?" Karen hesitated. "Well, the fact that your sister was driving to a location other than what you agreed to with passengers in the vehicle against your explicit instructions could be interpreted as using the vehicle in a manner not consistent with the permission granted. It's a gray area, but it could affect the claim." "I see," I said slowly. "And what documentation will the insurance company need?" "They'll want the police report, any witness statements, photos of the damage, and your statement about the circumstances under which you allowed your sister to use the vehicle." After ending the call with Karen, I decided to obtain the police report myself. A visit to the Evanston police station yielded more information than I had expected. The officer who processed my request handed me a multi-page document. "There's the basic accident report," he explained, "plus supplemental information from the responding officers and witness statements." Back in my apartment, I spread the documents across my kitchen table and began reading carefully. The facts laid out in the report painted a damning picture. According to witnesses, the Audi had been traveling at approximately 45 miles per hour in a 30 zone when it attempted to make a turn, lost control, and struck the witnesses' pole. The driver, identified as Amber Mitchell, had admitted to being unfamiliar with the vehicle. There were 3 passengers in the car at the time of the accident. But what truly caught my attention was a note in the officer's supplemental report. Upon inspection of the vehicle, an open container of alcoholic beverage was observed in the center console cup holder. When questioned, driver stated it belonged to one of the passengers. My hands shook slightly as I read this section again. Amber had been drinking, or at least someone in the car had been drinking. This detail hadn't been mentioned by Amber or the officer at the scene, at least not to me. I immediately called the insurance company again, this time speaking directly to the claims adjuster assigned to my case. I informed them about obtaining the police report and asked if they needed me to forward it. "Yes, please send that right away," the adjuster confirmed. "Our investigation is ongoing, but any documentation you can provide will help us process your claim more efficiently." I scanned and emailed the report, then asked, "How does the presence of alcohol in the vehicle affect the claim, even if the driver wasn't cited for DUI?" There was a brief pause. "It's definitely relevant to our investigation. If alcohol was a contributing factor, even if no sobriety test was administered, it could potentially affect coverage depending on the specific terms of your policy." By late afternoon, I received a call from a different representative at the insurance company identifying himself as David from the Special Investigations Unit. "Mr. Mitchell, we've reviewed the police report and have some additional questions about the circumstances of this accident. Would you be available to provide a recorded statement tomorrow?" I agreed readily, and the next morning I gave a detailed account of exactly what had happened, how Amber had asked to borrow the car specifically for a job interview in Highland Park, the conditions I had set, and how those conditions had been violated. I provided text messages showing her confirmation of these conditions and explained the family dynamics at play. 2 days later, David called again. "We've completed our preliminary investigation, including an interview with your sister. I should inform you that there are some discrepancies between your account and hers." "What discrepancies?" I asked, though I could guess. "Miss Mitchell claims you gave her general permission to use the vehicle for the day without specific restrictions on passengers or destinations. She also states that she informed you the interview might be rescheduled and that she might use the vehicle for other purposes." I wasn't surprised, but the confirmation of Amber's dishonesty still stung. "I have text messages that prove otherwise." "Yes, we've reviewed those. Combined with the police report and witness statements, we have a pretty clear picture of what happened. Our final report should be completed within the next day or 2. True to his word, David called back 48 hours later. "Mr. Mitchell, we've completed our investigation. Based on the evidence, including the police report, witness statements, and our interviews, we've determined that your sister violated the terms of the permissive use by driving the vehicle to an unauthorized location with unauthorized passengers and in a reckless manner, as evidenced by the citation for careless driving." "What does that mean for my claim?" "In this specific case, we've decided to approve the claim under your collision coverage, subject to your deductible. However, I should note that this accident will likely affect your premium at renewal. It wasn't a perfect outcome, but it was far better than a complete denial of coverage. More importantly, it officially documented Amber's responsibility for the accident and her violation of our agreement." Armed with this information, I began preparing for another conversation with my family. This time, however, I would be bringing evidence that couldn't be dismissed with platitudes about forgiveness and family bonds. A week after the accident, I received the final written report from the insurance company. It was comprehensive, detailing their investigation findings, including statements from witnesses and the responding officer. Most importantly, it clearly stated their conclusion that Amber had violated the terms of permissive use by driving to an unauthorized location with unauthorized passengers, operating the vehicle in a careless manner, and allowing alcohol in the vehicle. I made 3 copies of the report, along with copies of the police report and repair estimate from the body shop. I also consulted briefly with an attorney friend who specialized in insurance matters, asking about my options if Amber refused to take responsibility for the deductible and increased premiums. Small claims court would be your best bet, he advised. The documentation you have is strong, and the case is straightforward. Of course, suing a family member comes with its own complications beyond the legal aspects. I understood those complications all too well, but was prepared to pursue that avenue if necessary. Before taking legal action, however, I decided to give my family one more opportunity to handle this within the family. I texted my parents, "We need to talk about the car situation. I have all the official reports now. Can we meet tonight?" Dad responded almost immediately, "Dinner at 6. Your sister will be here too." When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, the atmosphere was tense but expectant. Mom had prepared a full dinner, an obvious attempt to create a sense of normalcy. Dad greeted me with a hearty handshake as if our previous confrontation hadn't happened. Amber sat at the dining table looking somewhere between defiant and nervous. "Good to see you, son," Dad said. "Your mother made your favorite lasagna." "Thank you," I replied, setting my folder of documents on the side table. "But I'm not here for a social visit. We need to resolve the situation with my car." Mom's smile faltered slightly. "Of course. But let's have a nice meal first, then we can discuss everything calmly afterward." I recognized the strategy from childhood delay. The confrontation softened the atmosphere, hope emotions cool. Not this time. "I appreciate the effort, Mom, but I'd prefer to address this directly. I've spent the past week dealing with insurance adjusters, police reports, and repair shops. I've missed work and lost sleep. I'd like to get this resolved." Dad's expression hardened slightly. "All right, let's sit in the living room then." Once we were all seated, Dad took the lead, his tone conciliatory but firm. "Darian, your mother and I have discussed this situation at length. We understand you're upset about your car, and rightfully so. Amber made a serious mistake." Mom nodded in agreement. "We've had some very stern talks with her about responsibility and keeping promises." Amber looked appropriately contrite, eyes downcast. "I really am sorry, Darian. I never meant for any of this to happen." It was the same performance I'd seen countless times throughout our lives, a well-rehearsed scene of remorse, followed by immediate absolution. I decided to skip ahead in the script. "I've received the final reports from both the police and the insurance company," I said, opening my folder and removing the documents. "I'd like to share what they found." Dad waved his hand dismissively. "We know what happened. Amber lost control of the car and hit a pole. The question now is how we move forward as a family. Actually, there are some important details that Amber left out of her version of events." I countered, handing each of them a copy of the reports. Page 3 of the police report notes an open container of alcohol in the vehicle. Page 5 details witness statements describing the car speeding and swerving before the crash. Mom's eyes widened as she skimmed the document. "Alcohol, Amber. You told us it was just an accident because you weren't familiar with the car." Amber shifted uncomfortably. "It wasn't mine. It was Tiffany's. She had it from the night before. I didn't even know it was there." "And the insurance report," I continued, ignoring her excuse, "concludes that you violated the terms of permissive use by driving to an unauthorized location, with unauthorized passengers operating the vehicle carelessly and allowing alcohol in the car. They've approved my claim, but I'm still responsible for the $1,000 deductible, and my premiums will increase significantly at renewal." Dad looked up from the report, his expression more serious now. "This is more complicated than we understood." "Yes, it is," I agreed. "And that's because Amber lied about what happened both to me and to you." Amber's demeanor changed instantly, the contrite act giving way to defensive anger. "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you every single detail, and the alcohol wasn't mine. You told the insurance company that I gave you general permission to use the car without restrictions," I said calmly. "That's a direct lie, and I had text messages to prove it." Mom looked genuinely distressed now. "Amber, is this true?" Before she could answer, I continued. "You also claimed the interview might be rescheduled and that you might use the car for other purposes." Another lie which both the text messages and your original story about needing the car specifically for the Highland Park interview contradict. Amber's face flushed red. They were twisting my words. I didn't mean to mislead anyone. The insurance investigator recorded your statement, Amber. There was no twisting involved. Dad, who had been silently reading through the reports, finally spoke. This is not good. Not good at all. He looked at Amber with disappointment, evident in his expression. Why would you lie about something so easily disproven? She didn't have a good answer, her mouth opening and closing without producing any coherent defense. I laid out my position clearly. Here's what's going to happen. The car is being repaired, and insurance is covering most of it. However, I'm still out my $1,000 deductible, plus my insurance rates will increase by approximately $700 a year for the next 3 years, according to my agent's estimate. That's a total of $3,100 that this accident will cost me. I paused to let that sink in, then continued. Amber needs to take responsibility by reimbursing me for these costs. She can pay the deductible immediately and then make monthly payments toward the premium increase. Mom looked troubled. Darian, that's a lot of money for someone just starting out in their career. It is, I agreed. Just like my car was a lot of money for someone just starting out in their career. The difference is that I earned my car through hard work and responsible choices. Amber destroyed it through irresponsible behavior and dishonesty. Dad leaned forward, his expression suggesting he was about to propose a compromise. What if we split the costs? Your mother and I could pay half, and Amber could pay half. I shook my head firmly. No, this isn't about the money, not really. It's about Amber finally facing consequences for her actions. If you pay for her mistake, you're just continuing the pattern that led to this situation in the first place. Amber, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. And what if I refuse? What are you going to do? Sue your own sister? The question hung in the air, a direct challenge to my resolve. I met her gaze steadily. Yes, I've already consulted with an attorney. The documentation is clear and compelling. I would prefer to handle this within the family, but I'm prepared to take legal action if necessary. The shock on all three of their faces was evident. This was completely outside the established family script, a deviation so unexpected that none of them quite knew how to respond. Mom was the first to recover. Surely it won't come to that. We can work this out. I agree, I said. But working it out means Amber taking full responsibility. Not partial, not symbolic, but full concrete responsibility for the damage she caused. Amber's defiant expression had transformed into something I'd rarely seen on her face. Uncertainty, perhaps even fear. The reality of the situation was finally sinking in. How? How would I even pay that much? She asked, her voice smaller now. We can set up a payment plan, I suggested. The deductible now and monthly payments for the premium increase. I'm not trying to bankrupt you, Amber. I'm asking you to be accountable for once in your life. Dad, who had been observing this exchange with a contemplative expression, finally spoke. He's right, Amber. This time you need to step up and take responsibility. Your mother and I have. Perhaps we've made mistakes in how we've handled situations like this in the past. Mom looked torn, her instinct to protect Amber battling with the undeniable evidence of her daughter's recklessness and dishonesty. We could help you with a small loan for the deductible, she offered. But it would be a loan, not a gift. You would repay us just as you'll repay your brother. Amber looked between our parents, searching for the rescue she had always been able to count on. Finding none, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Fine, she said, her tone bitter but resigned. I'll pay, but I don't have $1,000 just sitting around. I'll accept $200 now, and $200 per month, until it's paid off, I said, and we'll create a formal agreement in writing signed by all of us. Dad nodded slowly. That sounds fair. Very fair, actually. The smirk that had appeared on Amber's face after the accident was long gone, replaced by a sullen acceptance that for perhaps the first time in her life, charm and tears weren't going to extract her from the consequences of her actions. The weeks following our confrontation were awkward and strained. Amber made the initial $200 payment, reluctantly transferring the money with a terse text message. First payment. Happy now I didn't respond to the provocation, simply acknowledging receipt of the payment and updating our written agreement. My parents seemed torn between relief that the situation was being resolved and discomfort with the new family dynamic. Mom called more frequently than usual, our conversations carefully avoiding the topic of Amber or the accident. Dad was more direct, asking during one phone call, "Do you think things will ever go back to normal between you two?" "I'm not sure what normal means anymore," I answered honestly, "but I hope we can build a healthier relationship based on mutual respect." My car remained in the shop for nearly 3 weeks, as parts were ordered and repairs completed. The insurance company covered most of the costs as promised, and I paid the deductible knowing Amber's payments would eventually reimburse me. When I finally got the car back, it looked almost new again, but something had fundamentally changed. It no longer represented just my hard work and independence. It now also symbolized my refusal to be taken advantage of, even by family. A month after our confrontation, Amber made her second payment on time without prompting. The accompanying text was less hostile. Second payment sent. Car repairs all finished. It was a small gesture, but it suggested she was beginning to accept her responsibility in the situation. "Yes, all repaired now. Thanks for asking," I replied, deciding to acknowledge the olive branch, however small. During this period of limited contact with my sister, I found myself reflecting deeply on our family patterns and my role in them. For years I had accepted the unspoken arrangement Amber would act impulsively. Our parents would shield her from consequences, and I would be expected to understand and forgive without complaint. By disrupting this pattern, I had forced all of us to confront uncomfortable truths about our family dynamic. 2 months after the accident, our parents invited us both to dinner. I was apprehensive about the meeting, but decided it was time to move forward. When I arrived, Amber was already there, sitting somewhat stiffly at the dining table. She nodded a greeting, neither warm nor hostile. The dinner conversation was initially stilted, focusing on safe topics like work and current events. But as we finished the main course, Dad cleared his throat meaningfully. "Your mother and I have been doing a lot of thinking," he began. "About our family, about how we've handled things over the years." Mom nodded, looking somewhat emotional. "We may not have always been entirely fair in how we treated you both." Amber stared down at her plate while I listened, carefully unsure where this was heading. "The car incident made us realize that we've enabled some behaviors that weren't healthy," Dad continued. "For any of us." "What your father is trying to say," Mom interjected, "is that we're sorry, Darian. We should have supported you more strongly when you were rightfully upset about your car. And Amber," she turned to my sister, "we should have held you more accountable, not just for this, but for many things throughout the years." Amber looked up, her expression a mix of defiance and vulnerability. "So now I'm the family problem." Dad shook his head. "No, sweetheart. The problem was our pattern as a family, and patterns can change if everyone is willing to try. It wasn't a perfect moment of reconciliation, but it was something I had never expected to hear, an acknowledgement from my parents that their parenting had been unbalanced." The admission seemed to affect Amber deeply, as she fell silent for the remainder of the meal. As we were preparing to leave, Amber approached me in the hallway. "I've been thinking about applying for a second job on weekends," she said, not quite meeting my eyes, "to pay off the debt faster." I was genuinely surprised. "That's commendable. But don't overextend yourself. The payment plan we agreed on is fine." She shrugged. "Maybe I want to get it done faster. For me, not for you." I nodded, understanding the distinction was important to her. Fair enough. Over the next several months, a subtle shift occurred in our family dynamics. Amber made her payments consistently, occasionally ahead of schedule. More significantly, she began taking responsibility in other areas of her life. She mentioned during one family dinner that she had enrolled in a financial management course, and I later learned from Mom that she had started contributing more to her own rent rather than relying on our parents' subsidy. 6 months after the accident, my insurance renewal came due. As predicted, the premium had increased substantially, though not quite as much as initially estimated. Amber continued to make payments toward this additional cost without complaint. The most profound change, however, wasn't in our financial arrangement, but in how we interacted as siblings and as a family. Our parents became more equitable in their treatment of us, both no longer automatically taking Amber's side in disagreements. Amber herself seemed to be maturing, making fewer impulsive decisions and accepting responsibility when things went wrong. As for me, I discovered a newfound confidence in setting and maintaining boundaries. The experience had taught me that standing my ground, even when it created temporary discomfort, could lead to healthier relationships in the long run. Nearly a year after the accident, Amber made her final payment. She insisted on meeting in person to deliver it, suggesting coffee at a cafe near my apartment. When I arrived, she was already seated 2 cups of coffee on the table. "Black with 1 sugar, right?" she asked, as I sat down. "You remembered," I said, surprised. She shrugged. "Yeah, well, I'm trying to pay more attention to details these days." She slid an envelope across the table. "Last payment. Debt officially cleared." I took the envelope and nodded. "Thank you for following through on this." A moment of silence passed between us, neither awkward nor comfortable, just thoughtful. "You know," she finally said, "I was so angry at you when you refused to just let it go like you always did before. I thought you were being petty and materialistic. And now," she sighed, "now I think maybe it was the first time someone actually expected better from me. Everyone else, including Mom and Dad, would sympathize and excuse and enable, but deep down they didn't really expect me to be capable of fixing my own mistakes." She met my eyes directly. "You did." It was a moment of clarity. I hadn't anticipated a recognition that my insistence on accountability hadn't been about punishment, but about believing she was capable of more. "I'm proud of how you handled this," I told her sincerely. "It couldn't have been easy." She smiled, a genuine smile, without the manipulative charm she had often relied on. It wasn't, but maybe it was necessary. As we finished our coffee and prepared to leave, Amber asked, "So would you ever let me borrow your car again?" I laughed, surprised by the question. "Not a chance. But I might be willing to help you shop for your own someday." She nodded, accepting this boundary without protest. "I'd like that." Life isn't a movie where one dramatic confrontation magically fixes all problems. Our family continues to work through decades of established patterns, sometimes slipping back into old habits before catching ourselves. But the car incident marked a turning point, a moment when we collectively realized that true family support means holding each other accountable rather than enabling harmful behaviors. I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't have to mean cutting ties with those who hurt you. Sometimes it can mean establishing healthier relationships built on mutual respect, rather than convenience or obligation. And sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are the ones that ultimately allow everyone to grow. Have you ever had to stand your ground with family, even when it was difficult? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this tale of family drama and redemption resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Share this with someone who might be struggling to set boundaries with their own family. Remember, sometimes the most caring thing you can do is expect better from those you love. Thank you for listening, and I wish you courage in your own difficult conversations.